Hi, this is Sheena Carroll,
And I'm Lelia Broughton.
and we are both the hosts of the Apprentice Advantage.
Yes. And I'm so excited we get to talk about apprenticeship today, especially with our guests. Our guests have a lot of knowledge on just the state of our market. So I'm really excited to dig into it.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking to somebody from Industrial Scientific. This is a company that I think is pretty cool.
I think it's cool too. I actually went to visit Industrial Scientific. I got to meet some of the staff. A lot of them are really nice. Did you know that they have their own built-in kitchen?
Yes, I'm very jealous.
Yeah. Yes, and I got to eat there, and the food was really amazing, by the way.
Yeah, no, I didn't get to do that, but I did get to take some kids there to tour for STEM Summit last year, and seeing like the fact that there's like offices on the second floor and manufacturing on the bottom was like, it was just really cool, and just showing the kids that they were really fascinated as well. So
Now, how were the kids? Because I know when I went to visit, we needed to hold the rail, but we had to hold on as we walked up the steps, because if we didn't, we're like, hey, we put safety first. We're a company that prioritizes safety. Also, they're like, put your phone down when you're walking up the steps. And I almost was worse than the kids. I was like, but I have an email. So how were the kids whenever they did the tour?
shockingly well behaved. Also, they had so many interesting questions too. Industrial Scientific has this like mission too that they just want to was it like injury free or something by 2025? I'm sorry.
Ending death on the job by 2050.
Something good, man. Right. Ending death on the job. With that said, we have the privilege to interview Zack Burger from Industrial Scientific. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Zack. Tell us about the company and what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about the company first because it's way more exciting than everything about my background. Industrial Scientific is started in a garage here in Pittsburgh, actually 40 years ago. So we were celebrating 40 years of being in business, headquartered right off 376. You can see our Hollywood sign when you're on your way to the airport pretty easily. It's a worker safety firm. We do that through mobile gas detection. And so what that means is if you're in any environment that has a hazardous chemical or something that needs to be monitored, whether it's a coal miner, an oil rig worker, or even someone who's working in petrochemicals or a place that's got some groovy stuff that could be bad for you, we're making the devices, the monitoring, and the software backends that lets you do everything from monitor remote workers, make sure you know where man down alarms are. And we put it together in our mission statement where we say the people of Industrial Scientific are dedicating their careers to ending death on the job by 2050. And one of the things I think both of you may have seen at the facility is our countdown clock that actually has it backed up to say how many years, how many days, how many minutes do we have until that goal is achieved. It's something we are relentless about, and we're proud to be relentless about that, even if it involves holding the handrail for safety. A little bit on myself. I've been in Pittsburgh. It'll be 4 years this summer. So I lead the HR team. I have the privilege of leading the HR team for the Industrial Scientific workforce globally. And a lot of my job is just figuring out how do we keep this family-owned and operated company until about 8 years ago? How do we keep that feeling where people care about each other and there's not stuff in the way of that care for each other? And then how do we extend that to how we care about our customers and the families who are counting on their loved ones coming home from work safe every day, not just to get to the kitchen table, to provide for what's there. So it's a serious mission. We have fun while we do it, but it's something that we take seriously, and it's something I'm just privileged to be a part of every day.
Cool. I know that you also have a wall of records, and you name the things that you make after a record. So tell us about that.
Yeah.
And tell us about a project.
Yeah. So the story of Industrial Scientific is really one of innovation. Back in the all the way up through the 80s, particularly in coal mines, the replacement for the canary. So if you've ever heard the term the canary in the coal mine, the next gen of technology on that was a flame safety lamp. And these flame safety lamps would be in the mines, and if the flame spiked, it meant there was a presence of a chemical. If it went out, it means there's an absence of oxygen. And this was your signal to get out, get away from your area. The problem is when you have hazardous chemicals or toxic chemicals, having a open flame be your safety signal can actually lead to explosions. And so this safety equipment, which people who were using it trusted and generally worked, was also a safety risk just by its existence. And so Industrial Scientific built a better mousetrap, and having something that was not going to be that combustible or kind of safety risk that would allow workers to monitor and be considered safe in their breathing area so that they had that. in terms of that, innovation is at the core. So all of our R&D projects are named after deceased rock stars. And we've leaned into that a lot. So when you come up to our R&D area with our engineering and technology and products teams, you see a wall of golden records. And so every time an R&D team completes, whether it's a new product or an iteration or something that's going to add value for our customers, that is commemorated with a golden record to that team. And so we've got some ones that we've done in the past, Project Joplin for Janis Joplin. We've got some other ones. I won't say what they are right now, but we'll talk about them in the future. But we try to triangulate a little bit. So if it's something that's maybe for the European market, we'll try to find a European musician or something of that. If it's more focused on the Americas, we'll try to find an artist from that location. So it's become its own process, naming our R&D projects. But our takeaway from that is that it's a serious mission with serious consequences, and it doesn't mean you can't have a little fun along the way. Innovation can be both fun and impactful at the same time.
I know Prince made it to the wall, so I had to take a picture and send it to my mom. My mom was this big Prince fan, so even when he died, my mom was like, "Oh my goodness, Prince died." So I said, "Mom, I was in industrial scientific, and look who made the wall." I know that you all have hired apprentices in the past, and you currently have 2 apprentices going through the program. Tell us about why you decided to bring on an apprentice and how that process is going.
Yeah, so I would just say, first of all, we love our partnership with Apprenti and Apprenti Pittsburgh. So we are very proud of that partnership. We have had 4, so we have 2 who are going through the DevOps curriculum right now. They will join us. Time is flying.
It's
So
like they're almost done.
I think it's about a month. Yeah, about a month that we get there. And then we are very fortunate to have an alumni of an Apprenti, a similar Apprenti track, who's still with us. We had our first batch of 2. One person went to go do something a little bit more aligned with their own personal ambition. And then we love Donna. Donna,
Yeah.
very appreciative of her, and keeps us connected to that Apprenti community in a big way. I'd say really for us, it was the intersection of how do I need to respond as a member of my community, and really thinking about the system we're a part of. We like to think of them individually because we've given authority or control over certain things to different functions. So for example, we all count on functioning roads to be able to transit to and from work, or maybe I depend on public transit, or I depend on some other way. There's a lot of things that need to go right for that to happen.
Right.
There's an input in there. So you have to be watching your system and not just your input if you want to have a healthy and really long-term healthy business. And so I'd say our thinking on that has really been, this is just clearly the right thing to do. The other thing that intersects with, though, is that especially with technical skill sets, they are increasingly difficult to keep up with the amount of that technology has changed. Who was talking about AI 4 years ago as you needing to have any fluency with that for a job versus what that's become today? Say that a different way. If I started college 4 years ago, my curriculum was almost immediately extinct when ChatGPT hit the market in terms of and how to think about how work gets done or some of those other things. By the way, you could find a similar, maybe not as broad reaching GPT, general purpose technology. So it's a pretty broad thing that's out there. There are other things just in terms of how work gets done, even just what Salesforce has done to our landscape are different things. The tech is moving quickly, and it's really changed the value of why do you need a degree? Because your experience in keeping up with those changes is probably in many fields just as, if not more important than the fundamental kind of academic underpinnings of that job. And as an HR leader, I'd gladly put someone with ambition, hunger, and a commitment to just continuous improvement. I'd put that person into a role any day versus someone who's got very robust academic credentials, but maybe hasn't had to keep up with that pace of change. And so Apprenti was just a really good intersection of those 2 things. If here's a group of people who are actively raising their hands saying, I want to be part of something different, I want to do more. And it's a part of a total systems thinking, a part of what's good for our community, which again, in the long term is just healthy.
Perfect.
We already discussed this a little bit, but how do you see the apprenticeship model aligning with industrial scientific's goals?
Yeah, I personally like it. Again, we talked about, I like the community aspect of it, and that there's more than just an immediate, did I open this job rec and did I feel it or fill it? I feel that there's just a larger thing to feel good about, a larger intentionality or purpose behind the Apprenti program that I think is easy to grab onto and tell the story of. In terms of where it fits in for us, What I want to avoid as an HR leader is I want to avoid what's called an Einstein requisition. And what do I mean by an Einstein requisition? I've got someone with 35 years of very unique gas and chemistry or whatever maybe their scientific exposure is or knowledge base. If they leave the organization just on the natural course of things, nothing's wrong, they're retiring, see you later, hope to see you at the cookout, all of that. And then the organization turns back around and says, the capability that just left was 35 years of experience, knew the customers exquisitely, knew the applications. That's what you need to open a rec for to go hire. And my answer to that is, won't work. That person does not exist. They did, but they just retired. So they're no longer in the market. And so it leads you to very strange decisions if you're trying to fill an Einstein rec and what am I doing to find a needle in the haystack versus what am I doing to develop pools of talent or give people different on-ramps into opportunities that maybe they wouldn't have access to otherwise. So if I can take that job, understand what that job is probably not a job. It's probably 6 or 7 part-time jobs that have just been put into kind of a bucket. If I can break those piece parts out and maybe I can take these 2 pieces and give it to Joe 6-pack of donuts over here, and that's going to be an interesting career development for Joe. And these other 2, I can go out into the market. Those are replaceable skills. And then I need to do a stretch assignment or something to cover this other piece of work. Most HR people and frankly, most managers probably don't think about their jobs that way. It requires you to be closer to the work. It requires you to understand how work moves through your organization. And so I think for us, where that comes in with Apprenti is doing just that. How can we craft these things that give us access to folks who are actively saying, I don't want one job for the rest of my life. I want to change what I'm doing. I want to expand what I'm doing. I want to be more. I want to do more on behalf of the organization. It's just going to take a little bit of a different thinking than what we've been accustomed to make that opportunity a reality.
So when I think about the state of our hiring market, especially when it comes to hiring in tech, in these tech roles, right? I was trying to think of a different word other than it's trash, right? It's just not that great. A lot of people are not hiring in tech roles, especially in these other pathways outside of going to CMU, maybe getting a 4-year degree. And then even with that degree, you have a huge candidate pool that is like, we still don't have a job. How do I know? Because a lot of our candidate pool is still filled with candidates who have the degree, but they just don't have the job because they don't have the 7 years of experience. So what would you say to companies that are like a little reluctant to hire someone through a apprentice or through any other trade source when it comes to hiring tech talent?
Yeah, so I would just say at this point, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the Pittsburgh job market or kind of what's going on there. So I think there is some context there that I want to point to, but I'll just say in this, first mover advantage is already gone. There's a group of employers here in Pittsburgh. I'm very fortunate that Industrial Scientific is one of them and one is going to continue to partner with the program. But there are people who are taking with intention and purpose actions now to develop relationships with alternate, you can use whatever term you want. It's not the traditional go get a degree, go get an internship, go get a full-time job that you will work at for 40 years and never change and go move on into retirement. That model hasn't existed for decades and it's not coming back. But yet we build a lot of infrastructure and thought processes around it. And I would say those thought processes are probably more what's trash, Leah, than if the actual market itself. As an HR person, I can tell you, a lot of jobs don't get posted. When I'm doing a promotion for somebody or I'm doing different things, and my number is just an Industrial Scientific globally for last year, is that I hired, I believe it's 100 people exactly across the world. I promoted 109 in the same time frame. So there's actually more opportunity going on inside the company as different people move or going through that same process we just talked about. And so I would just say on that, for companies that are hesitant or getting in, the only way to get better is to start. And there is no day like today to get started. And I would say the longer that you wait to start, the further down the curve you're going to be, not compared to just the market conditions, but compared to other companies that are taking actions now to make sure that there is access to talent and that there is access to the capabilities that are needed to compete in the modern digital changing on a daily basis world we're in. And so on that, it's really not, and I think this is something that's maybe shifted recently, given some of our market demographics or given where we are. This is no longer just a corporate citizenship ideal. This is not something that's just, oh, it's a nice thing to do. This is actually related to your survival as a business over the
Yes.
next 10 years. And the actions you do now can have return on
So
investment.
how do you shift that mindset? How do you get them to start thinking that way?
I always say this. I think there's always supporting people, supporting processes that people can look at when you're doing something new, and it's very easy to find a way to say no. And so if you're out there and as a business leader, you're looking at your numbers, you're looking at your balance sheet, you're not sure where Q2 is going to land, that's great. But what if I could tell you that there is a decision you could make now that could have 35 years of return, almost guaranteed if you do it right? Hiring is the only decision you can make with relative certainty, or at least line of sight, that you could have multi-decade return on that one decision. What group of investors, no matter what stage your business is in, is going to say, boy, this group has just looked at a series of long-term investments or long-term return on investments for talent and has just said no, versus somebody else? That's really not going to go over well. So I don't view this as an outreach effort. I don't view it as a good faith effort. This is really about survival and making sure that we have access to the talent. And if I'm not going to find the talent in my market, I'm either going to pay an extraordinary amount to relocate someone here to do that work, or I can invest a fraction of what I would do to do that here in my community and actually build the talent that I need. I just have to participate in that build as opposed to receive that build. So
Right.
participating is going to be your only way out.
Participating is going to be your only way.
Well, we'll say, yeah, we haven't like fully elaborated more like on the current like local like labor market yet, but I will say like I graduated and moved to Pittsburgh at the tail end of the Great Recession, and yeah, the whole breaking into the market and trying to get that first job is like very difficult. I know like in my field, like in marketing and writing, like it was a lot of contractor roles. Actually, like one of my first contract positions, my coworker and now friend now works in industrial scientific in their marketing department. Hi.
Mm.
But I am starting to see like similarities to that again here as well. So like when it comes to the state of the greater Pittsburgh labor market, are you seeing similar things? What are you seeing right now?
Yeah. So I think when you get into the data on what's going on in Pittsburgh, you have to understand what the data gives you and what it doesn't in terms of some of those things. Pittsburgh has such a legacy going back to the Industrial Revolution and just so many things that in many ways sound similar to some of the challenges that we have today in terms of how people go to work, what type of work they do, what the employer-employee relationship is like. I think it's indicative that things are changing, and things are changing, I think, faster than the headlines or the perception can keep up with it.
Mm.
And so there's a couple things that I'll say. If you go back over the last 50 years, if you started in 2024 and went back to 1974, the last 8 quarters of unemployment in Pittsburgh are the lowest that it has been over that entire period of time. Let me say that differently. The past 2 years of labor market availability, or you can look at that just as a regional unemployment rate, the lowest unemployment rate in the last 50 years has been achieved in the last 2. So we are at a spot, and that's a little bit different than the rest of the country. That is generally, some areas have grown much faster than the national average. Some of the more bigger locations, LA, Chicago, Houston, New York, those places pretty much set the national average in terms of where those go, just because of the amount of people that are there. So Pittsburgh hasn't had this dynamic. They might have felt some impacts from it as larger things were happening, but Pittsburgh has not had this dynamic since the early 70s and into the 60s. What does that also mean? It means that your most experienced manager doesn't have a mentor who knows what it's like to navigate this labor market. Your manager training and the competencies, how they show up to things like career development conversations, might be outdated to the consequence of someone feeling like they belong or included or have a path in the organization, when it's going to be very easy. They don't even have to pick up the phone. They just have to not ignore that message on LinkedIn, or not ignore that reach out on Indeed, or whatever these channels are that are reaching people more directly. And so I would say if you anchor in the data and where that is and realize that Pittsburgh is in a unique spot. Another thing is that the composition, and that's why the Pittsburgh Technology Council and this partnership with Apprenti Pittsburgh is so important. There are more people employed in technology and R&D fields here in Pittsburgh today than really were ever employed by the steel and metals and mining location. That is very true today and has been for a long time, but it doesn't get the fanfare, right? Steel City is Steel City. Steel Tech City, I guess, doesn't have the same ring, but especially for technical talent, someone is trying to recruit your employee every single day. So if re-recruiting your employees and finding different ways to get non-employees to become employees is not an active part of your thought process, someone else is going to benefit from you not thinking about that or not having intention. Did I answer your question?
So what tech positions are currently in high demand?
Obviously, AI is huge. I would say one thing that's been different for us, or maybe not different, we've had to make sure that we've got the fundamentals covered in an interesting way. And as you make different decisions, I'll point to NASA. NASA has a philosophy that if they purchase a component from the supply chain, that they need to make that component at least once in-house so that they retain the in-house capability to understand, am I getting good chips? Am I getting good sensors? Am I getting good kind of piece parts that I'll assemble into some groovy satellite or go do something? Very few commercial businesses can afford to have that type of footprint. But I think that's a lot of what we're looking at coming out of both the supply chain shocks of 2020 and 2021. And then everybody's looking at supply chains and how supply chains are performing in this current environment. And so there's a lot that goes into that of, do you have the in-house capability to know if your supplier is committing to something they can actually produce, or how much work you may have to do to develop where that is. And so those technical skill sets I'm familiar with them just because in our business I would use the word the hard sciences. I mean, hard as in mechanical, electrical, some of these very kind of science-based courses. But we're seeing that even in terms of our software solutions and making sure we have in-house capability on UI and UX, and that we're actively thinking about that and developing that. I can be a great software engineer, but that doesn't mean that I've designed my architecture so that any functionality is 2 clicks deep and no more for my user. That just may not be intuitive to somebody there. And so finding that it's kind of like putting together an orchestra. You've got to find those specialties, but you also have to find those conductors that can pull it all together, or the person with that experience that can come in and say, this is how this should really look, feel, or work. And so there's a term for that where you talk about technical being a red player and a business person with business requirements being a blue player. And you need to have a system that's creating purple people. You don't want someone that's just technical. You don't want someone that's just business. You need someone that can walk across both of those worlds and help them talk to each other. Right. And if you do that well, your projects are probably ending on time and ending on budget for the features that you said that you needed. If you're not doing that well, your projects are probably behind schedule. You're probably struggling with, hey, we could make schedule, but we have to take everything the users care about and move it to the next release. That's not great. Right. So these are the signals you can look for to say, am I getting the right type of talent? And in terms of what's in demand, that kind of crossing, really no matter what that depth of technical is, if you're not giving those technical individuals exposure to the business vocabulary, it won't come together. And your business people can't always get through user acceptance testing or some of these other things. Talk a little technical. So how do you build a system that brings those two together? I would say is probably more in demand. There's a lot of people with the depth on the technical side. There's a lot of people with the breadth on the business side. That little narrow kind of purple people middle is the sweet spot.
I think that's what I love about Apprenti, because I think Apprenti develops purple people, right? Because we just interviewed a candidate who was degreed in construction, and he had leadership skills in construction, but he wanted to shift into technology. So just because an organization gave this guy a chance, now he had all the things in construction. Now he's skilled because we provide the training. So now he's skilled in technology, which make him purple.
Yep.
And we have a lot of those candidates in our candidate pool. Again, they're not degreed in software or cybersecurity, but they do have the managerial skills in other occupations, maybe not in tech. So it's our goal to train them in tech. And I love that, so that they can become purple.
Yeah. Are there like apprentices ones who've completed the program, like current candidates and stuff, you get the background of like education and customer service. And, like you're getting like those soft skills as well, like the ability to communicate and adapt that like you don't traditionally learn in college.
We just had an apprentice that was with another company and she was a teacher. So then she she is now a business analyst. But her supervisor was like, she just dives in, she catches on really easy, but then she just automatically want to help others. So she's like teaching people that's been there already some of the newer skills because it's just like her natural shape is to teach, but she's in tech, which again, I'm going to keep saying it, makes her purple.
And that's just it. And understand, well, and I think that's it, right? That you could use the word ambition. Sometimes I feel like ambition has a negative context. So ambition, not at the expense of anybody else, maybe that way. But there's maybe a softer way to say it, which is just curiosity.
I'm going to pivot just a little bit. So I mentioned like the Great Recession a little bit earlier. So some experts are like saying right now that we're seeing like new shift. There's like the Great Resignation 2.0.
Yep.
As a nature professional, have you seen any signs of this?
Oh, I have. In fact, I would say Great Resignation 2.0 is probably already here. And I just don't know. The fun thing about anytime you're dealing with labor or labor economics, it is the last signal you get. So when things get bad, you generally don't find out until they're really bad. When things get better, and our media does a very good job reminding us of it's going to take a long time till you see unemployment because it's a lagging indicator. And then we come out with something new and everybody looks at the employment market and they're like, did it happen yet? Did it happen yet? So you just told me 2 years ago that it's the last thing to happen. And let's not forget that it is the last thing that kind of occurs. Let's talk about that in relation to Pittsburgh, I would say generally. Pittsburgh nets year over year about neutral or declines in population and kind of the whole area, right? So I'm not just referring to the city of Pittsburgh. International migration has been the reason that we have netted close to neutral in most cuts of the data. And so what that means is there's some natural kind of people retire, they go out of state, they move somewhere that doesn't have as rough of a winter or things of that nature, which gets counted in those numbers. But about as many people leave the state or along those lines. You see a lot of people enter the state and enter the region. And it's probably reasonable to expect that the next 20 years looks a lot different than the last 20 years as that relates to just international movement of people. And that's not just something specific to our point in time now in the US. It's really something that you see globally where there's a lot more restriction and constraint coming on movement, especially I would say residential movement or people changing where they live. My view on this is that the Great Resignation 2.0 is already here. And I think people are a little bit more hesitant right now as everyone's looking at each other. I remember the Great Resignation 1.0 or the original, and it was all of a sudden forklift drivers went from $13 an hour to $17 an hour to $23 an hour in a span of about 6 months. And it had a way of, by the way, that had great impact for working people and folks that maybe were having to work multiple jobs that didn't have to work multiple jobs or were able to get some semblance of their life back as a result. So I don't want to say it's all bad. What is bad about this is if you're not ready, and there is not going to be as many workers in our supply of labor nationally, regionally, even just locally, right here in the city of Pittsburgh, it's not going to be the same. So with that reality, you have to think about, so what? I can't just depend on the traditional systems that have provided, or I can't just post a job requisition and kind of just wait and see what hits it. I'm going to be very intentional about going out, developing who I want, connecting with people in advance of my need to hire and having those types of relationships. Or we're all just going to be incentivized to continue to just pull the trigger on wage increases or other things that, again, we can do, but they really don't shift the fundamentals. It just increases the competition for an already scarce resource. Finding other ways to say, maybe we should look at our on-ramps into our organization, or what is my barrier to entry? What are the requirements that I have coming into it? And where do I have flexibility on those types of things? Because I just can't afford to do business going forward like I have.
You might want to, you just can't afford to, right?
Can't afford to.
So what are some strategies, now looking ahead, knowing all these things, what are some strategies that you are taking in hiring at Industrial Scientific that you would even give advice to the larger, greater Pittsburgh people hiring, all the things? What advice would you give them? Yeah,
the primary one, I have a lot I could say on that topic. You don't even have to buy me a coffee. I'll just shoot me a text and I'll just start rolling. But with that, I would say the biggest piece of it, and this is a lot of what we've talked about, we actually have a business system that is pretty robust. We actually went through a problem-solving process on this and what we call a created problem to solve, which is what happens if my attrition goes from 3% to 13% this year? And just what am I impacted? Why is that the case? And we actually found that in a lot of cases, management teams were with good intent, right? No one was malicious or wanted anything bad to happen, but were hiring for the job right in front of them. They were feeling the pressure of needing to perform, to get their metric, or, hey, you haven't gotten on-time delivery, 3 months. What are you doing to turn that around? I'm down 3 shippers, or, what? And so there's just a lot of kind of our management systems can incentivize people to make near-term decisions. And so the near-term decision, I've got a role, and what is that? That's actually a huge driver of attrition in the companies if you only hire someone for the job in front of you and don't hire them for the career behind that. And a lot of companies say we want to hire for a career, and what they mean is, please don't leave us. But when I'm hiring for career, when we're talking at Industrial Scientific about hiring for a career, what we're saying is I'm hiring you for skills you have beyond the immediacy of the job in front of. The term I like for that is best athlete. And I look at Michael Jordan as a great example of that. Michael Jordan was an amazing rock star basketball player, but he also played baseball. And he was actually pretty good as a baseball player, right? He wasn't the rock star that he was in basketball. There's a lot of people that weren't maybe watching baseball as much that tuned in when Jordan got up to the plate. But the point of that is that Michael Jordan would have probably excelled at any sport he put his mind to because he had that best athlete training, orientation, ambition about where it is. So is your hiring process, is your promotion process, is your development process making it easy for best athletes to go and grab different skills, experiences, and pull an interesting career together? If you're hiring just for the job in front of you and someone who can just do that job, you're probably leaving something on the table. And those people aren't happy either, by the way. That says two more. I'll say anytime that I've been in an offer where someone's gotten an offer from another firm at Industrial Scientific, their request for me has been the same. And look, I've yet to meet the person who says, I make too much money. Everybody wants to be able to impact their wage. Everybody wants to be able to impact their standard of living. And we're not a charitable organization. We're a for-profit business that's out there. So money is just part of the game. Because it's part of the game, take it out. I don't need to really adjust for that. What has been the thing that folks have asked for? I need a career, not path. I need a career map of what are the 5 or 6 things I can take this job and turn it into. And I'm actually interested in this one, but I'm not ready for it, right? Because we might be getting a new house, or we got a kid on the way, or just my life fundamentals are changing. But what are the 5 or 6 things that I could be working on? And based on what I do in the next 18 to 24 months, how does that advance me on each one of those? And so some people call that career pathing. I like to call it career mapping because you're looking at different destinations and what it takes the sense to be there. No one has accepted a counteroffer, or in many of those cases, unless there has been a guarantee on the table that says a documented career mapping conversation will happen within 30 days. This is what people are looking for. They're looking for the ability to learn, grow, and do more with their life. And so if you're hiring for the job right in front of you, you're going to miss all of that. And you will be a victim of a circumstance that you could actually be an influencer on.
Like looking like at that like long-term like strategic like workforce planning, where do you see programs like Apprenti fitting into that?
I like Apprenti for a number of reasons, but I would use the term high-low mix, right? So you're always going to need within a dynamic of a team, you're going to need that team leader. You walk in, you ask everybody, hey, when you're in a pickle, who do you reach out to? 8 or 9 people will say the same name, right? So everybody needs that. You could call it den mother, you could call it team lead, but you need somebody that's holding that kind of experience and the ability to maybe navigate speed bumps. It may not be a barrier, but someone just may need to slow down and move over something a little bit more slowly. Who helps them do that and feel comfortable with that? So when I say high, that's what I'm talking about. High experience, high understanding of the business, high understanding of the consequences of your decisions. And you need that to be paired with the lower end of that. And low implies value. But when I say this, lower experience, fresh set of eyes, new perspectives, different ways of solving problems from different environments come in and add to that team. And you'll actually find on teams where you get that, the lead or kind of the team lead persona actually ends up having way more job fulfillment because they're working with a group of people who want to learn from them and who want to be part of their legacy. And there's nothing better to somebody, especially when they're within 2 or 3 years of retirement. And they're like, what's my career development? I said, your career development's in other people. Your career development's in the thumbprint you leave on the people around you. And who's going to make sure that the pension or 401k stays fun in terms of the company results, and who can carry that on. Apprenti is a necessary element of maintaining that mix, because if you have just one and not the other, you're going to start running into some challenges. And those are manageable challenges you can avoid if you're getting your mix right. But you got to understand the work, you got to be really close to it, and you have to understand those dynamics of the team. That's a lot of relationships, that's a lot of resurveying, it's hard to do at scale, but you have to do it. You have to do it.
So, Zach, what is some words of wisdom that you would give to all of our HR leaders, everyone who is listening in the multiverse, right? Being very extra when I say that. But what advice would you give them when it comes to hiring?
So I'd like to ask for permission for a little bit of, I'll do a hashtag real talk here on the podcast. Hashtag. So one of the things, Lelia, you and I get to partner on is actually being on the advisory committee for Apprenti Pittsburgh and how that's going. It's been interesting to me in our conversations how everybody associated on the Apprenti Pittsburgh side of things says things like, HR has really been a barrier. Or, hey, we've made progress when we've talked to business leaders about why Apprenti makes sense and gets in there. And every time we've talked to an HR team, we felt like we were the enemy and not an ally in what's going on here. So I would just maybe make an appeal to my HR family in the greater Pittsburgh area, and I'd ask that you check your risk calculation on this a little bit. You're probably going to need a sponsor. You're probably going to need something that's out there, but imagine the value, imagine the credibility that comes from sitting at the table and knowing that you've been able to either start, restart, or reinforce a relationship with the talent community. Leah, how many do we have right now of people who have raised their hand, have gone through vetting, and are waiting for an apprentice assignment? It's hundreds.
We have 150 candidates.
150 people across Pittsburgh who have actively raised their hands and said, I'm willing and ready to do more. I just need my shot to do. I don't know how you leave this conversation not a little convicted that with the amount of growth, with the amount of just business tech, everything that's happening here, that we haven't been able to get those folks plugged into opportunities it's a shame. It's a shame. And it's something that we should really lean into. I get it. It's non-traditional. Anytime you do something new, you are taking a risk. Is somebody going to take my cord over this? What if it doesn't work out? What if it does work? What if this is an amazing?
What if it works?
What if it works? Yeah. It's working for us. It's working great, by the way. Long term, I want to see us have just standing positions that are just dedicated to Apprenti. We've purposely designed the work to be easier for folks coming into the organization, and that we're just carrying an Apprenti 3 or 4, maybe I hope to get to 5 positions, which is what my organization here in Pittsburgh can afford. And that's going to look a little bit differently for other folks that are out there. But I would say there's a difference in a leader I worked with several jobs ago put it to me this way. A lot of people want to ask why or what if. There's a lot of power in just shifting the question to ask, why not?
Why not?
Why not? And so if you assume that you're going to get good results, if you assume that it's going to be there and start taking actions and steps just to make sure nothing gets in the way of that, you get a whole different universe of possibilities. Yeah, it means you may have somebody that you got to change a couple basic quals on a job rec for. It may mean you've got to work with a manager who doesn't want to change the way that work moves through the department to break that up. But a lot of my brethren and family in HR, we talk often about, do you have a seat at the table? And my question would be, okay, if you've got a seat at the table, what are you using your voice for? What's your agenda? And if it's not something like this, something that is community rooted in purpose with individual benefits, both to the company and the employees involved, everything about this is a win. Everything about it is a win. By the time you are convinced of that, you may be a little bit too late if you're not on it already. So the longer you wait, the longer the advantage, the longer that benefit's going to be being achieved by other people. And I want to see Pittsburgh employers win when it comes to this. So find a way to answer the question, why not? Work with your leaders to get the right sponsorship on this. But this and other programs, I just think we are not going to be able to afford to ignore these types of solutions going forward. In an environment where the demand of labor is historically for the lowest in 50 years, we need all hands on deck. We cannot afford to leave people behind. And each of us puts our oar in the water a little bit differently, but find the way to answer the question, why not Apprenti Pittsburgh? That's my advice.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure having you on the show today. We may ask you back.
I may say yes.
We're
But why not?
I love it. I love it.
And that's it for Real Talk. And thank you so much for watching this episode of The Apprentice Advantage.
Hi.
Bye.